So a meditation student was in touch recently with a question that I think is super relatable for all of us. And essentially it involves, there's some, for lack of a better term, drama in the family. She's on the periphery of it. It doesn't directly affect her day to day, but she loves her family. She wants the best for them. And the way she described it is she sees them essentially making a lot of destructive decisions, right? We talk about creation, maintenance, and destruction. And while all three are necessary for evolution in anyone's life, in any system, too much of any one of those things throws the whole system out of balance, especially when it comes to destruction, because it's so easy to, make one decision and then it just dominoes into others. So, she was describing she was really describing the situation, but also asking, what is her kind of role as the greater light, the lighthouse, so to speak, as the main meditator in that immediate collective of her family. We always tell you that, just by meditating, you are having a cooling effect, not only on the greater collective of the whole world, but of the individual collectives, the families, the work cultures, etc., that you find yourself in. And this is totally true. You cannot change yourself as you do through meditation and not also change the world and everyone whom you are in contact with. Even if it's just, within the context of your partnership. You change, therefore the partnership changes. Even if this other person never meditates, never is interested in changing at all. It changes because you have changed. That said, what is one of the most fundamental teachings of the Bhagavad Gita, this central text in our practice, is that we establish ourselves in being to perform action. It is not we just established ourselves in being and we radiate being and we are being, and that eventually everybody is just going to come and see the beauty of the light of that being and change their ways, right? That there is a moment in time at which that beingness can be directly applied. But the question comes down to, are we as meditators, as the ones with that being or that expanded awareness that can be applied for something more creative and progressive versus destructive in those situations of conflict, are we in touch enough with our fine level feeling to be able to discern what is a dharmic intervening and what is an adharmic interfering, right? And that is not always an easy thing. And sometimes we are going to have the best intentions, and yet we might not. We might end up finding that we're interfering. Now, why would that be? Well, if we're giving advice or we're trying to change the situation or we're getting involved or we're saying a lot from more of a small self place of, I want to control this, it makes me uncomfortable, if only they did this, it would be better, of somehow feeling that we want to manipulate the situation either to pacify something in ourselves or because of some impatience or other anxiety that the situation brings up in us, it's pretty safe to say that's adharmic, right? That it's not going to go well. Even if you have the best intentions, the road to hell is often paved with them, right? That's the cliche. And so, in those situations, we might actually, when you notice that coming up, can you let that go? Can you go into your own practice, both with eyes open and eyes closed practice, by extension in life, to actually be a witness to what's happening and to just, again, go back to how much of the unbounded can you represent and embody in any moment in waking life, and then trusting that that will have an impact. And then you wait for the worthy inquiry. You wait for someone to ask you for advice or to ask for a suggestion. And so if the adharmic way is coming more from a small self place of wanting to control or feeling anxiety or getting frustrated because we just want this to be over and done with and you guys are silly that you don't get this, that is probably not the feeling that we want to act from in terms of actively saying something or doing something, because we're not really coming at it from, with the backing of universality. We're coming at it from some small self need to not want to experience what's happening now and trying to skip over whatever life is actually handing to us, because for some reason in the cosmic calculus, we're being handed that to refine something within us as well as the others. But there is also a place and a time for that being that we established to get actively applied in a more dharmic way. So if on the fine level feeling, you just feel the charm to say something, or you get the worthy inquiry where they turn to you and ask your opinion, or they notice that you're not, you're the only person in the room when this fight is happening that isn't saying something all the time. I sometimes feel that the person who is often the quietest in those moments has the most interesting or relevant thing to say. And that's not just in family fights. That could be around the college seminar table. I was always so intrigued that whether I was participating a lot or a little, it always seemed like professors noticed the people in the class that were just speaking to hear themselves speak, or had only read like half the reading, and so were just speaking all the time about that one paragraph or page they read to seem like they had done the homework, versus the people who were really reflective and had actually thought about things, or were really like grasping and wrestling with the ideas at hand. Even if they only spoke once during a class, you could just see the professor being like, yes, okay, this is someone who's getting an A for class participation, because they're taking this seriously, and what they have to say is really growing organically out of what the whole conversation is, not just like, oh, I need to say something to hear myself speak or to get the points for speaking, and I'm going to say whatever it is, even if it's totally divorced from the rest of the conversation. And I think that example is actually quite relevant, because we can find ourselves there in both immediate and extended family situations. And so if we're quiet and we're observing it and we're waiting for either that worthy inquiry or that moment when someone we can sense on a fine level feeling is open and is really, even if they're not asking what, should I do in those exact words, but you can energetically tell that they are open to another way of doing things, or to being able to hear it because of how you approach it and you deliver it, then that is the dharmic moment to apply your beingness, your greater sense of vision and perception and awareness to the moment. And that's not going to come from a feeling of needing to control or from some kind of anxiety. It's actually going to come from a very calm place. It's going to come from a place of great expansion, of great inner knowingness, a gnosis that, wow, I see this, I love them, I know that they wish and want better for themselves and they don't know how to get out of their own way. And, my teacher Tom would say sometimes when the worthy inquiry is just barely there, or it's imperceptible and it's sort of on the energetic, not even the verbal level, you spoon feed them. And you see if they can digest that. And if they can take a little morsel, then you can always give them more. But you give them, what you intuitively discern that they can actually digest in that moment. You're not going to give a new baby who's just learning to eat, a steak for dinner or something really complex to digest. You're going to give them simpler foods, and you're going to, give them a piece or two. And then, if that goes well, then you can always have more. So an example from my own life where this idea of dharmically intervening versus adharmically just interfering came up for me, well, it's sort of an outgrowth of many years of traveling with my father. When I was in high school, he and I started taking these extended hiking trips because it was a nice way to spend time together as I was leaving the house. And we always had a great time, but he has this habit, and I would say it actually comes out of a sweet nervousness sometimes when he's in a new place or he's with a foreign guide, where he'll start comparing whatever he's seeing to other places. Oh, these mountains remind me of the mountains in Peru, and it's like we're in Iceland. These mountains look nothing alike. Why are you saying this? And it would always irritate me because on some level, he just wasn't being present to the beauty around him. And it was never in a malicious way. It was never in a mean or dismissive way. It was just in this kind of slightly, it didn't come off as anxious, but it just came off as not really present, not really in awe of what was around him, even if he, in another breath and another moment on that same trip would express just absolute wonder at that particular place's, topography or whatever. And so over many years, or at least in the early years, I would, pick on him for this and stop saying that. You can't talk. And, no father loves to be corrected by their daughter, especially like that. So it would, it would create some tension. And it was never a big deal, but I would always feel bad for doing it, but it was also annoy me so much. So about 7 or 8 years ago, we were traveling through the Hebrides. These are some small islands to the west of Scotland, kind of just out in the middle of the Atlantic. And they're really spare and beautiful. And we had a lovely guide who was this retired professional from actually I think London, who had retired to Scotland, and he was driving us around on these like really complicated mountainy roads to get to all these obscure hikes and walks. And I'm in the back one day of the car, sort of asleep, and I hear my father in the front talking to this guy. I don't remember what he said. He was going on about some other trip we've been on and how it was so great how they coordinated the travel this way and that way. And he was sort of implicating a comparison to what we were doing, which is driving, which really to get around those islands, you can only drive. There is no other way to get around. You're not going to get around on an animal or this or that, or, a vast, kind of funicular system like you might in the Swiss Alps or something. And I was getting so annoyed in the back. I'm like, this guy is slaving around, driving us around to all these places and organizing all this stuff for us so we can have this trip. And he's going on about how great some other system is. Like, it comes across as so ungrateful. And yet I know my father was not trying to express that. He was just trying to make conversation with the guy. He just didn't know what else to talk about, or they had been in the car for a while and they were done talking about politics. I don't know. And so this sense of annoyance and frustration came up with me, and I really wanted to say something in the moment. And yet I knew that it wouldn't go anywhere. It would have been, he would have felt, scolded, and it just would have created nothing good. So I just continued to pretend to sleep. I went back to my room when we got to the hotel. I meditated. I later joined him for dinner. And I was able to say to him in that dinner, look, I know that you meant no disrespect. I know that when you were talking to this guy that you were just making conversation. But from his perspective, I think it could seem like, you don't enjoy what he's doing for us. You're not appreciating it. And I was like, and you raised us always to be grateful. You raised us always to be others oriented and to express appreciation. So I'm just saying, maybe you don't. And to his credit, he actually immediately heard that and said, oh yeah, that's not at all what I meant. I'll apologize tomorrow. I'll let him know how much I appreciate all that he's doing for us. And it was, really a credit to my father, to his humility, to be able to take that correction and realize, oh, of course, it could seem that way. That wasn't my intention. And he absolutely did the next day. And that only came because I didn't say it in the moment, right? Like, I waited until there was a more dharmic opportunity where he could actually receive that little bit of clarification to actually have a more fulsome picture of what happened so that he could actually express himself in the most authentic and kind of true way, because what he was saying before wasn't actually the heart of the matter. So all in all, you see a lot of destruction around you. You see your loved ones acting in a destructive way. What to do? Well, you do ultimately have to really attune on the fine level feeling to what is actually happening here and where is the dharmic opportunity and where is saying anything more adharmic and more destructive. And so we have to remember that we can offer the impulse for evolution through our own beingness and sometimes through more direct, thoughts or words or actions, but we cannot be the evolution for someone else, right? If an addict, or even if it's an addict to destruction, a behavior, not like a physical substance or something, they have to hit their rock bottom to make the choice to decide anew. We cannot make that for them. It is their own evolutionary process. It's their own karmic process. It is, essentially they're doing, as Tom likes to say, the research they need to do to finally someday make a different decision. And so you can't make that decision for them. So sometimes the most dharmic thing will be setting a quiet, different standard through your beingness, through this very distinct level of consciousness that you cultivate every day when you meditate. And sometimes that will look like not colluding with the negativity or just setting a different standard or not cooperating with the status quo and not encouraging them, but also not, becoming this kind of scold and forcefully trying to control them, because even the most loving kind of control is still a kind of control. And control is antithetical to evolution, as Tom reminds us, and you can't control. It's a fallacy. The world is always evolving. So, what does that look like? I think the question is, if I say something more direct or if I get involved, am I adding to greater coherence or chaos? And I think you will intuitively, on the level of charm, know that answer, and then you can act accordingly.